Hello YouTubers, welcome to my semi-automatic pistol basics video. Even though these are just the basics, I do plan to be pretty thorough. And unlike revolvers, which are fairly simple, semi-autos are diverse in their actions and controls and parts. So this is going to run pretty long, so you might need to plan to stick around for a while. And to keep things as simple as I can, I'm going to categorize semi-auto actions into 5 basic types. Again, like revolvers, the actions of semi-autos are defined by the mechanical effect of pulling the trigger. And traditional semi-autos, which have a hammer, whether it's internal or external, are available in 3 actions. You have the single action only, abbreviated SA, the double action single action, abbreviated DA/SA, double action only, abbreviated DAO. In addition to the traditional actions, more modern semi-autos are available with safe actions. And these generally don't have a hammer, but instead use an internal striker. And safe actions are available in single action and double action only. So to summarize all that, semi-autos are available in traditional single action, double action single action, DAO, single action safe actions, and DAO safe actions. Okay, so let me explain what all that means. As I said, actions are defined by the mechanical effect of pulling the trigger. And on the single action semi-autos, the trigger performs one single action, and that is just to drop the hammer. Okay, the most common single action semi-autos in use today are the 1911 and the Browning High Power. But as you can see, well, with either of these pistols, if I pull the trigger with the hammer in the down position, nothing happens. So in order for the weapon to fire, the hammer has to be either manually cocked or cocked by the action of the slide. And once the hammer is cocked, pulling the trigger drops it, discharging the weapon. And once the gun fires, the hammer is then recocked by the action of the slide, making it ready to fire the next round. I just want to note that in the event of a misfire, you cannot attempt to refire a single action auto by simply re-pulling the trigger. And that may or may not be significant depending on your perspective, but that's subject for another video. The next action is the double action, single action. And these pistols have a trigger that performs 2 actions. Alright, when the hammer is down. First, it cocks the hammer, and then it releases it. And then once the gun fires, the slide recocks the hammer, transitioning the pistol to single action mode for all subsequent shots. And in the event that a double action, single action should fail to fire, you could attempt to re-fire by simply pulling the trigger as many times as you want. DAO pistols start on the same premise as the double action, single action pistols, in that the hammer is cocked and released by pulling the trigger. However, when that gun is fired, the slide cycles, but the hammer is returned to the down position. That means that every single shot on a pistol like this has to be fired in double action only. And whether or not you can attempt to refire a double action only in the event of a misfire depends on the model. Some of them may be able to do it, but many of them, like this Ruger LCP, require a trigger reset with the action of the slide. And as you can see, without movement of the slide, the trigger becomes disengaged from the hammer, so the gun cannot be refired. Next we have the safe action semi-autos, and these guns don't have an external hammer or an internal hammer. Instead they have an internal striker, which is basically a spring-loaded firing pin. They also have a variety of passive safety features which block that striker, which is why they're called safe actions. And I'll cover those features later, but for now just know that they come in single action and DAO. And as far as the safe action pistols go, the DAO is by far the most common. To my knowledge, the only pistols using a single action are the XD and XDM lines from Springfield Armory. The safe action was developed by Glock and has been copied to various degrees by many of the other firearm companies. As a matter of fact, Smith & Wesson copied so exactly in their signal pistols that they got slapped with a lawsuit, which they lost, as well they should have, I think. But anyway, Glocks, Sigmas, and most safe action actually cock the striker and then release it forward, which is a double action. Okay. Like the LCP, these pistols usually require a trigger reset with the action of the slide, so they cannot be refired by pulling the trigger in the case of a misfire. The XDs, on the other hand, have a striker that remains in the cocked position, and as a matter of fact you can see it poking through the back of the gun here, which they use as a cocking indicator, or a cocked indicator. And so pulling the trigger on these guns simply allows the striker to move forward, and then the cycle of the slide resets the striker. Okay, before I go any further, I should probably explain what semi-automatic means. And I should have done that at the beginning, but since I didn't, I'll just do it now. Semi-automatic means that the gun goes through a cycle when it's fired and stops when it's ready to be fired again. That means the gun will fire a cartridge, push the slide backwards, eject the spent casing, cock the hammer, or reset the trigger as it needs to, return the slide forward, stripping a round from the magazine, and load it into the chamber. And at that point it stops the cycle until the trigger is pulled again, as opposed to fully automatic firearms that do all of those things, but they fire the next and all subsequent rounds until the trigger is released, or until the ammunition is exhausted. So that's the difference. Okay, the next thing I'm going to cover is the nomenclature and features of semi-autos. And semi-autos vary much more than revolvers do, and they often have lots of unique parts depending on the model. So I'm going to cover the universal parts first and then go over some of the special features. But there are so many different models out there, it's up to the individual gun owner to completely learn all the parts and functions of his or her weapon, and no single video will ever be able to cover all of that. Okay, to start, at the top you have the sights. You have front sight and the rear sight. Also at the top, or near the top on the side, there is an ejection port, which is the opening which allows spent cases or live rounds to be ejected from the gun. The lower half of the semi-auto is the frame, which includes the trigger guard, which obviously just guards the trigger, and the grip. Now, the front of the grip is called the front strap, which may or may not have stippling on it to allow better control during firing. The back of the grip is the back strap, and again, they may or may not have stippling to allow for better control during firing. And the back strap usually arcs up into a tang, which serves to protect the shooter's hand from either the slide or the hammer, or both. And the bottom of the grip is known as the butt. On almost all semi-autos, on the side of the frame there is a slide stop, and you may hear slide stop referred to as slide release or slide catch or slide lock. That's all fine, it really doesn't matter. I personally call it a slide stop, but I don't get too wrapped up in the nomenclature or the semantics on that particular part. There will also be a magazine release of some kind, and they may be either on the left side or ambidextrously on both sides, and in some cases the magazine release is found on the butt. There is an opening in the butt that leads into the magazine well, where magazines are inserted into the gun. And this is a magazine, which is often incorrectly referred to as a clip. This is a clip, and a clip holds rounds together before they're loaded into a magazine, or in the case of some specialized revolvers, before they're loaded into the chambers of the cylinder. But in any event, this is a clip and this is a magazine. This is not a clip. As all firearms do, all semi-autos also have a barrel. Alright? However, the barrels are integrated into the pistol in several different ways. Some models have an external barrel, which is fixed like this Ruger Mark II. However, most semi-autos have an internal barrel, and those can either be fixed to the frame on the inside, or they can be free to move and tilt. I'll explain how that works later as we get into a couple of these. Okay, so those are all the parts that will be found on semi-automatic pistols. Every now and then you will find one that doesn't actually have a slide stop, but generally speaking, all the parts we've discussed so far are universal. Okay, most semi-autos have a slide, but again, not all of them do. The Ruger Mark II, for example, actually uses a bolt that travels in a fixed upper receiver. Nevertheless, most semis do have a slide, as you can see in all these other pistols. Some semi-autos have an external safety, which is often referred to as a thumb safety because it's actuated and deactivated by the thumb. Traditionally, they've been found on the left side of the gun, but over the years, a lot of pistols now have ambidextrous safeties to accommodate left-handed shooters. And you know they love that. The double action, single action pistols will come with different variation of external safeties, and a lot of them actually also act as a decocker, which means that it safely drops the hammer, putting the pistol into double action mode for that first shot. Some of these act as both a decocker and a safety, which means that after it drops the hammer, the gun is rendered safe, and in this case the trigger is disconnected from the hammer until the safety is flipped off. Okay. Now, Some double action single actions have a decocker that only acts as a decocker and not as a safety, and those will return to the ready to fire position after they drop the hammer. Double action autos have the inherent safety feature of a long, heavy trigger pull, like a double action revolver. Now, that means that many shooters have the safety off all the time, if it's even an option to be on, so they don't have to worry about manipulating it or forgetting to do that, more importantly, when they need to deploy the weapon quickly. Now, you can also find an external safety on some of the safe action pistols. However, since these pistols also have a relatively heavy trigger pull and they're internal passive safeties, an external thumb safety is rather redundant, and I think in most cases they're just there to comply with certain safety standards required by states like California. Another external safety found on some semi-autos is the grip safety. And grip safeties are semi-passive in that they don't require any other manipulation other than just grasping the grip. However, if they're not depressed, the gun won't fire. Now, if the grip safety is wide and flared like this, it's called a beaver tail. And beaver tail grip safeties are popular because they better protect the shooter's hand from the hammer or the slide. And that's especially true for shooters that might have big beefy hands whose skin might ride up above the tang. And that could result in what we call either a hammer bite, which is a pinch, or slide bite. Grip panels are found on a lot of semi-autos. They're often referred to just as grips, and they come in a wide variety of materials, textures, colors, shapes. And so one of the easiest ways to customize a semi-auto is to simply change the grips. 1911 style pistols have a separate piece comprising the backstrap, and this is called the mainspring housing. And mainspring housings do actually contain a part called a mainspring, but externally they're available in various materials and shapes and textures that the shooter can easily customize. And then at the bottom of the frame you might find an accessory rail, and what these do is just allow for the attachment of flashlights or lasers or other accessories. Separating the slide and the frame to get inside the gun to clean it is called field stripping, or takedown, or breakdown. And in order to do that, a lot of pistols use that slide stop as a takedown pin, which you take out and you can separate the slide and the frame. Other pistols have a designated takedown lever of some kind on the outside, as in the case of the XD. And Glocks and Sigmas also have external takedown, which makes it pretty easy to disassemble. And now that we're inside, we can take a look at some of the basic internals. Right? Internally, every semi-auto will have a recoil spring. And the recoil spring may be on a guide rod, and some recoil springs come completely off of that guide rod, and others are attached to it in a way that would require far more disassembly to get that off. Some guide rods are full length, or they might also be short, like on the original 1911s. And pistols that use a short recoil spring guide rod will also have a recoil spring plug on the other end of it. Okay, some smaller or let's say less expensive semi-autos will have a recoil spring that surrounds the barrel itself, and those are known as blowback systems, and the barrel will be attached permanently to the inside of the frame and can't be removed. But most semi-autos have a barrel that is a separate piece, and it can be removed from the slide. Okay, so now that we have the barrel out, we can take a closer look at them. On the top of the barrel, you will find either a barrel hood or locking lugs. And what these do is they lock the barrel into the slide when the gun is in battery. And in battery means that the slide is forward and the gun is ready to be fired. And you can see the barrel is locked into that slide. On the underneath there is a device which allows the barrel to move backwards and then tilt, and that might either be a free hanging barrel link or an angled cam. So what happens is when the gun fires and the barrel and the slide move backwards together, the barrel then tilts down, allowing the slide to continue traveling unimpeded, which ejects that spent casing. The muzzle end of the barrel is secured in the slide by either a hole that's machined exactly to it, or in some cases there might be a barrel bushing which actually fits into the front of the slide. And on some barrels there is a feed ramp that you can see here, which is the sloped part that allows the rounded nose of the cartridge to ride up and then slide smoothly into the chamber. Not all barrels have a feed ramp. You can see the 1911 doesn't. And the feed ramp is actually in the frame. Alright, looking at a slide, there are some internal features of note. You can see where the locking lugs of the barrel lock in on this 1911 slide. There is also an extractor, as you'll see on the right side there. And some extractors are partially external, with just the claw protruding into the slide. And what extractors do is that they grip the cartridge and pull it out of the chamber as the slide moves backwards. Okay, also, like revolvers, the area directly behind the barrel is known as the breech, and this is the breech face, which strips rounds from a magazine and feeds them into the chamber. You can see a good angle on that. Right there's your breech face. The safe actions also have what looks like a button on the inside of them. You see here, actually you could probably better see on the Sigma. But what that is actually the firing or striker block, and that prevents the striker from moving forward until it's pushed up out the way. Okay, so now finally we'll look at the internals of the frame. From this angle you can get a good look at that magazine well, and if we were to insert a magazine, you can see how the rounds are fed up into the pistol. Also on the frame there is an ejector, and what the ejector does is to smack the round or casing out of the ejection port. So as the slide moves back, the extractor pulls the casing out of the chamber, and when it gets to the full rear position, the casing slams into that ejector and is kicked sideways out of the ejection port. Like that. Now, notice the triggers of the safe actions. Okay. In many cases they have what looks like a double trigger. And what these do is they move a block so that when the rest of the trigger is pulled, it will move backwards. If the safe trigger isn't depressed, then the actual trigger can't be pulled. Okay. And that prevents an accidental discharge unless there's actually a finger on the trigger. And when the trigger is pulled on safe action, it raises a spur, and that pushes up that striker block in the slide, allowing the striker to go forward. So that means that if there isn't a finger on the trigger can't move backwards, and the striker can't move forward with that block in the way, and that means safe actions therefore have two safety mechanisms that prevent accidental discharges, but are passively engaged by simply putting a finger on the trigger. Also on the frame you can see slide rails, which may be machined into the metal of the frame, or they could be metal inserts in a polymer frame. And those are what the slide runs on as it's moving back and forth. So there you go. I think that's pretty much all the basics of semi-automatic pistols. There are so many different models out there that you would have to take the time to learn all the specifications and functions of your particular handgun in order to become competent with it. But as far as the basics go, I think that's pretty much it. Remember to check back for my recommendations on buying a first handgun, which I'll be posting up later. And thanks for watching.